You do not wake beside a husband, you wake beside a man the parish was never told about, and that one silence decides what your body is worth before the kettle even boils. The room smells of cold grease, wet plaster, and the breath of a man who can leave whenever the rent feels heavy. His coat hangs on the door. Yours does not hang anywhere because nothing in this room carries your name. Somewhere across the city, another woman wakes under the same gray light. She signed something once. A clerk dipped a pen and wrote her into a ledger, and the law learned her name. And that is the only difference between the two of you. Everything filthy and everything safe in 1849 comes down to whose name a stranger agreed to write down. One of you is a wife. The other is a thing that happens to live here for now. And the morning does not care which is which until it has to. The law has a word for the married woman. Theme covered woman. The moment the contract is signed, she stops being a separate person in the eyes of every court in England. Her name folds into his. Her money becomes his. Her body becomes a thing he is owed. And in exchange, the law agrees she exists. It is a terrible bargain, and it is still the only roof on offer. You were never offered even that. There is no word for what you are. You are not a widow because no one died. You are not a wife because no clerk wrote it down. You are not a daughter of this house because the house belongs to a man who calls you by a soft name in the dark and forgets it by daylight. The law does not hate you. Hatred would at least mean it had noticed you. The law simply has no line where your name would go. Think about how small that is. A single stroke of ink in a register you will never read. The married woman across the city loses almost everything to that ink. Her wages, her property, her right to refuse. And yet that same ink is the only thing standing between a woman and the gutter in this year. She is robbed by the contract. You are erased by its absence. Disaster reveals rank quickly, but paper reveals it first. So begin with the morning the way your body begins with it. There is no clean way to wake in this room. The water in the jug has a skin on it from the cold and a smell from the standpipe 2 streets over, where the whole court draws from one pipe an hour a day. You wash your face from a basin that has washed 100 faces. The soap, if there is soap, is gray and hard and smells of fat and lye. The same lye that will crack your knuckles open by noon. You do not bathe. Nobody you know bathes. You wipe the night off your skin and call it enough, because the day will not wait for you to feel human. The married woman across the city wakes in a house with its own water. A maid carried it up warm. There is a cloth, there is rose water, there is a fire. Someone else lit before she opened her eyes. She will be clean today not because she is better, but because cleanliness in 1849 is something you buy, and you were never given the coin to buy it. The smell of poverty is not a moral failing. It is the smell of one pipe, 1 hour and 40 families, and the city has trained its nose to read that smell as guilt. So begin with the bed, because everything begins with the bed. The wife wakes in a room that the law will let her stay in, not own. A married woman owns nothing in 1849, but stay. If her husband dies, she has a claim to 1/3 of the warmth he leaves behind. The walls do not love her, but the walls are obliged to her. Your bed is different. Your bed exists at the pleasure of a man who pays the rent and remembers it. The mattress is damp at the edges where the wall sweats in winter. The sheet has been turned so many times, the weave has gone soft as ash. And none of it is yours. Not the bed, not the room, not the morning. He can put you on the stairs with a sentence, and the law will hold the door open while he does it. There is no court in this country that will ask him to explain. Go down to the street and the abyss widens, because money is where the cruelty stops pretending to be private. The married woman hands her wages to her husband, and the law calls this natural. She scrubs floors 12 hours and the coins drop into his palm, and he is the one who decides whether she eats. It is humiliating, and it is survivable. The contract that swallowed her also feeds her. A man who starves his legal wife answers to neighbors, to the parish, to a vague public shame. The leash is real, but the leash also keeps her off the cobbles. You have no leash and no plate. You scrub the same floors and the coins are just as real in your hand, until the man who keeps you decides they are his. And they are. Because you agreed to nothing in writing, you can demand nothing in writing. He takes the week's pay off the table, and you watch your own labor walk out the door inside another person's pocket. Hunger is not shared equally in this city. It climbs one body and steps over the next, and the only ladder it reads is paper. If you want to keep walking through the history they buried on purpose, subscribe and stay in the dark with us. Look at the work itself, because the work is its own slow murder. Maybe you take in washing. Your hands live in water that never warms past lukewarm. The skin of your palms goes white and soft, then splits at the seams. Your back learns a curve it will never give back. The steam fills the one room you live and sleep and eat in, until the walls weep, and the bread goes to mold on the shelf. Maybe you take the needle instead. A shirt for a few pence, and a shirt takes hours, and the hours take your eyes. You sew by a single tallow candle that smears the air with the stink of burnt fat, seam after seam after seam, until the thread blurs into two threads and your spine folds toward the cloth like something praying to it. Women died of this, and the city had a name for it: the slop trade. The cheapest labor a great city ever found, because a woman with no man and no contract will take any price rather than the gate of the workhouse. The wife sews too, sometimes, but she sews for her own house. Her stitches are not weighed against starvation. When her eyes tire, she sets the work down. You cannot set the work down. The rent does not pause while your eyes recover. A man can be tired. A wife can be tired. An unprotected woman who stops is simply a woman the city has finished with. Even rest is ranked here, and you were sorted to the bottom of it before you woke. Walk past the grand houses near the park, and the contrast turns obscene. Behind those windows, a lady wakes late. Her marriage was a treaty between two fortunes. Her settlement was drawn by lawyers who fought for every clause. She has pin money written into the agreement, actual coins the law says her husband cannot touch. She is covered and cushioned both. The same word that buries the scrub woman's wages builds the lady a soft private vault that is the joke of coverture. It crushes the poor wife and it pampers the rich one with the very same ink. And you stand outside all of it, not in the vault, not under the leash. Just out, the rain finds the gap in your shawl that you already know is there. The wet wool starts to smell of the animal it came from, and you understand standing there that respectability was never about virtue. It was about whether a man with a lawyer had agreed to be responsible for you. Nobody asks if you are good. They ask whose you are. And when the answer is no one, the question closes like a door. The body is the next page, and it is the ugliest one, because the body is the only property the unprotected woman is allowed to keep, and the city has 1,000 ways to take even that. The kept woman learns the arithmetic young: a soft name, a warm room, a few good months, and then the slow cooling. He marries someone with a settlement and a father. You are the thing that gets quietly removed before the wedding. Your face was the contract, and faces expire. No clause protected you, because there was no clause. You were a handshake, and handshakes are forgotten on purpose. And when the warm room is gone, there is the street, and the street keeps its own ledger. The city is full of women the law refused to name, and the law found a use for the refusal. You stand under a gas lamp because there is nothing else left to sell but the standing. The cobbles are slick with horse filth and the runoff of 1,000 drains, and your shoes, if you still have shoes, drink it up. Men pass who would never speak your name in daylight, and there is a newer cruelty waiting in this trade, a sickness with no cure in 1849 that hollows the body slow. Mercury for medicine which poisons while it pretends to heal. Your teeth loosen, your hair thins, your mind clouds, and the cure and the disease race each other to the same grave. The wife who strayed once has a husband and a name to hide behind. You have only the lamp and the whetstone, and a body the city rented and forgot to return. Even what you eat is divided down the same line. Thing 4. The wife sits to a table, mutton, sometimes bread, that is actually bread butter, that is actually butter. Food chosen by someone whose job is to keep the house alive. You eat what a penny buys at the end of a day that earned barely a penny. Bread cut with chalk and alum to make it whiter and heavier and emptier. Tea that is mostly used leaves dried and sold again. Herring, if the week was kind. You are not starving in a single dramatic night. You are starving slowly across years, the way the poor always starve. A little less than the body needs, every single day, until the body simply agrees to be less. If you think this is the bottom of it, because the law has not even started showing you what it does to the women who fall the rest of the way, well, the bed and the wages and the cooling were the gentle part. What comes next is the part the city built on purpose, to catch women exactly like the one you have become. So listen for the child, because the child changes everything. The married woman's children belong to her husband, not to her. In 1849, a father can take his children from their mother and hand them to a stranger, and she has no standing to object. It is monstrous, and it is also a kind of armor. The children are legitimate. They have his name, his claim, his future. The law that steals her babies also stamps them as real. Your child has no father in the eyes of any office in England. The word they use is bastard, and they use it on the paperwork without flinching. The child inherits nothing, carries no name the law respects, and you carry it alone, through a winter that does not slow down for you. You feel it turning under your ribs while you scrub, and you already know the arithmetic of milk and rent, and how rarely both win in the same week. A child is a future for the wife. A child is a sentence for you. The same small heartbeat means safety on one side of the ink, and ruin on the other. The birth itself draws the line in blood. The wife is brought to bed in a clean room with a doctor or a paid midwife and clean cloth, and a fire kept high. You deliver where you can, on a floor in a corner with a neighbor woman who has done this before and washed nothing. Fever follows dirty hands in this year, and dirty hands are most of what the poor can afford. And if you live and the child lives, the next cruelty is already waiting. You cannot work and feed an infant at once, so you pay a few shillings to a woman who takes babies in. Baby farming, the city calls it without shame. And some of those women feed the babies, and some of them feed them a syrup of opium to keep them quiet and cheap. And some of those babies are never collected because the mother could not pay and never meant to. You hand over the only warm thing you have left, and you walk back to the wash water. And you spend the rest of your life not knowing which kind of woman you handed it to. If this sits heavier than anything they let you read in school, leave a like before you go on. A child is a future for the wife. A child is a sentence for you. The same small heartbeat means safety on one side of the ink and ruin on the other. Then comes the cough, and the abyss shows its floor. The wife gets sick, and the house closes around her. There is broth, there is a fire, there is a husband who at least must explain her death to someone. She fades in a bed that knows her name. You get sick and the room you do not own gets cold very fast. The man who kept you does not nurse the unprofitable, and there is one place in this city that will always take a woman with no one: the workhouse. You walk through that gate the way the poor have walked through it for a century, and the smell hits before the door even closes. Boiled bones lie carbolic, and the particular sourness of too many sick bodies kept too cheap. They separate you from the little you arrived with. They cut your hair if it suits them. They put you in the women's ward, where the unmarried and the abandoned and the ruined are stacked like the city is ashamed they kept breathing. They hand you the work that the workhouse keeps for women: oakum picking, old tar rope unwound and shredded with your fingers until the strands come apart. Your nails split, your fingertips bleed, and the tar works into the cuts and stains them black for weeks, hour after hour, in a cold hall that smells of tar and unwashed bodies, and the thin gruel they call food. The food is measured to keep you just on the living side of dead, enough that they are not blamed for a corpse. Never enough that the gate looks worse than the street, and the law calls this charity. The building is the parish, saying out loud what the ledger only whispered, that a woman no one signed for is a cost to be managed, not a person to be saved. And the cruelest ward is the one with the quiet door. Because there is another place the unprotected woman falls, and it is worse than the workhouse. An inconvenient woman, in 1849, is an easy woman to put away. A brother who wants her gone. A man who tired of her and fears her tongue. 2 signatures and a fee, and a doctor who barely looks. And the asylum swallows her whole. Grief is called hysteria. Anger is called mania. A woman who insists too loudly that she has been wronged is the easiest of all to declare mad. The wife has a husband whose name is on the line if she vanishes. You have no one whose reputation your disappearance would cost. You can be erased a second time, and the first erasure made the second one cheap. Inside the walls, the day is cold water and locked doors, and a draft that smells of carbolic and damp stone. They bleed the difficult ones and dose them, and bind the loudest into a chair. A sane woman learns fast that protest is read as proof. The more you insist you do not belong here, the longer they write that you do, so you go quiet. You fold yourself smaller than the room, and that folding is the last skill the unprotected woman ever learns. The bars are real, but the colder thing is how reasonable it all looked on paper. And now the body has aged and the city has no more uses for it. The old wife sits by a fire that is at least obligated to her children, if the law left her any owe her something. Her widowhood is a status with a name and a small legal shape. You grow old with no name at the end of you. The work dries up because the floors want younger backs. The man is long gone or dead, and nothing of his was ever owed to you. You sleep where you can, a doorway that smells of last night's gin and this morning's rain. A relief ward if the parish is feeling like charity that week. The cold finds the same gap in the same shawl it has found for 30 years. Nobody is cruel to you. Cruelty would be attention. You are simply unaccounted for, and the city has always known how to not see what it never wrote down. If you had woken without that one line of ink, what do you think would have broken you first? The hunger, the cold, or the forgetting? Tell me below. And then the last page, which is the same for everybody and somehow still divided. The wife dies, and there is a stone. A name, a date, the word beloved, even if it was a lie. Her grave is a place a person can stand and be sad. The parish that swallowed her wages at least gives the bones an address. You die and there is a cart. A pauper's grave is a wide pit, and you go into it with strangers. Quicklime instead of flowers. No stone because no one paid for the cutting, and no name because the law never finished writing yours. The same earth takes both women, but only one of them is allowed to be found again. Even the ground keeps the ledger, and the pit does not even keep you long. A pauper's grave is opened again when it is full enough to reuse. The bones are shifted, the lime does its work, and the space is sold to the next nameless body the parish could not place. You are not buried so much as stored briefly and cleared. A wife has a plot, you have a turn. So stand back now and look at the whole of it. 2 women under the same gray London light, the same hands, the same hunger, the same rain in the same shawl, and a single line of ink, deciding which one keeps her wages, her children, her sanity, her name, and her grave. The abyss everyone imagines as a thing of money or morals or God turns out to be a clerk and a register and a man who agreed or did not agree to write you down. It was never about who was good. The wife was not saved by virtue, and you were not damned by sin. She was covered, and you were uncovered, and the words mean exactly what they say. The law did not hate the woman without a contract. It simply built a world with no line for her to stand on, and a world with no line for you is a world that can let you fall forever, and call it nobody's fault. Remember the morning. Two women waking under the same light. One of them folded into a man, and the law called it marriage. One of them folded into the dark, and the law called it nothing at all. And the only thing that ever stood between filth and fortune in 1849 was whose name a stranger had agreed to write down. And if you want to wake inside another life the history book scrubbed clean, there is more of it waiting here. Come back into the dark with us.